you for joining the second Direct Grants webinar with an emphasis on insurance requirements. My name is Jeremy Schwartz, Associate Director of the San Francisco Office of Cannabis. Today is Thursday, October 29th. This webinar will be recorded for everyone's convenience. Before we dive in, I wanted to extend some thank yous, certainly to the social equity community for your continued engagement. It is very much appreciated as we partner on this exciting development, direct grants for startup and ongoing costs. I'd also like to thank Director Rodriguez for her ongoing leadership and to the rest of my colleagues with the OOC for their ongoing support. Specifically, here we have Eugene, Nikesh, Ray, and Yulia all joining us this afternoon. Lastly, I'd like to thank Peter Goldstein, Deputy Director of the Risk Management Division, for partnering on today's webinar and to provide insight regarding insurance requirements as a part of this direct grants program. Very shortly, I will share my PowerPoint, our PowerPoint presentation. Please bear with me just a moment. So some housekeeping items. If you missed our, actually, here we go. I have my script separate. Thanks for bearing with me. So for some housekeeping items, if you missed our first webinar, a recording is available on our website. Navigate to sf.gov/department/office-cannabis or search SF Office of Cannabis with your preferred search engine to locate the recording, in addition to helpful information about this program. We recently provided an FAQ in response to written questions. Our grant-specific content can be found about halfway down the page. Our materials are translated into Chinese, Tagalog, and Spanish. I'd also like to thank our intern, Zoe, for joining this call. And we also extend our best to our colleague, Alexandra, as she is celebrating her birthday. With that being said, a roadmap of today's events, I will give a brief refresh of our program, grants eligibility, the flow of the application. Then we'll turn over the mic to Peter Goldstein to give an in-depth explanation about insurance requirements, grant funds and prioritization in addition to eligible expenses, the reimbursement process and timelines. We'll conclude with a brief Q&A. Towards the end of the presentation, we will open up the chat function. We certainly encourage questions. This will not be the last opportunity to ask questions. Please feel free to engage with cannabis grants at sfgov.org should additional questions come up. As a reminder, San Francisco was one of the early adopters of a social equity program. To date, we have existing technical resource offerings, technical assistance offerings. This includes our partnership with OEWD, the Office of Economic Workforce Development, and a contracted law firm for Part 1 compliance as a part of the permit process. Also, for those interested in being engaged with a pro bono attorney, please utilize the emails you see here, and we will happily pair you with one of our paneled attorneys at the Bar Association of San Francisco. Further below, you see the source of direct grant funds, two sources from our partners with the state, who we certainly thank for making this opportunity available. As folks know, the other component of this grants program was to solicit proposals from organizations interested in providing technical assistance. Our review committee will connect next week to identify those with the highest scores and select organizations to engage in contract negotiation so that we can stand up those technical assistance offerings. If you haven't done so already, please sign up for our distribution list. We will send periodic updates to our community as they become available. As a reminder, to be eligible for the direct grants program, one must be a verified equity applicant in the city and county of San Francisco with a unique identification number. That equity applicant must have a cannabis business permit application in our system, the status of which must be either processing, build out, or approved. These conditions must have been met by October 14th. We've certainly circulated communications to our industry. There are approximately 89 equity applicants that are eligible for this direct grants program. To date, we have about 15% of our eligible pool of applicants registered as a bidder, submitting their application. We strongly encourage folks to start that process if they haven't done so already. Which leads me to the next slide. Please navigate to our website. We have a step-by-step guide to walk folks through the process. First and foremost, please register as a bidder, secure your bidder number. This will be helpful to include in your grants application. There, we ask you for your business information. We ask you to fill out a demographic questionnaire. It is voluntary. We highly encourage you do so because it will help to inform future grant efforts. Lastly, there's a section for folks to include their estimated reimbursement for eligible expenses. We'll walk through those eligible expenses later. What you put on your initial application will not lock you in. It is helpful for us to see where folks think they'll plan on spending their funds. You can adjust the specific dollar amount at a later time. Third, we will have folks transition from their bidder to a supplier. We will create and circulate a sourcing event. Before we do that, we're encouraging folks to first register as a bidder. And once we hit a good amount of eligible applicants, we will circulate that sourcing event to facilitate the supplier process. Then people will enter into a grants contract with the city. From there, they can start the reimbursement process. I understand that this is a bit of a process for folks. We've done our best to clearly communicate the flow that folks will have to navigate. Again, this is something that won't have to be duplicated every year. This is the first grants program of its kind, and what we're doing is laying the foundation to streamline the process in the future should there be additional grant opportunities. Here we have insurance considerations. With that being said, we'll kick it to our city partner, Peter Goldstein. Peter?
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you everyone for attending today. Hopefully this will not be the equivalent of an online root canal. Insurance is not always everyone's favorite topic, and I'll try to keep it simple and to the point. So on the screen, you should see 4 categories right now, different types of insurance that apply to different types of risks and will not apply to everyone seeking a grant. So let's talk in a little bit more detail. General liability insurance, as the title suggests, is broad, and for most businesses covers the risks that present themselves in the course of doing business. Specifically, general liability pays for when somebody gets hurt or somebody's property gets damaged unintentionally, doesn't matter. The insurance company signs a contract with the person or company buying the insurance, and they're promising to pay on your behalf if somebody gets hurt or you damage somebody's property. And they're also promising to pay for an attorney to defend you in that situation. Typically, the minimum the city asks for from any organization doing business with us or getting a grant would be $1 million limit. And I'll stop there and say I realize that in this particular endeavor, we may be dealing with startups, smaller businesses, and so my office would certainly be willing to consider smaller limits if some of you find that the price is prohibitive. to get $1 million. We just need some documentation and explanation, and we'd be happy to consider lowering that if it's not feasible. It's in the interest of the company, like those of you who are listening, of buying the insurance, because it will protect you also in the event something happens and you need a way to pay for it. The alternative is very unpleasant. If in fact it's found that you are liable and you have no insurance, then a court would look to you and your business itself to pay for those damages. The insurance that you would buy, if you haven't already, you would buy through a broker or an agent. Those are words we hear often, so what do they really mean? An agent represents an insurance company, a specific one, and a broker is out there shopping in the marketplace over different insurance companies to try to get you what's best for you. The city does not care what you use. We just care that you can show us documentation that you have secured a policy. That would be shown to us on something called a certificate of insurance, which your broker should issue for you, and it should actually be at no cost once you procure the coverage. Workers' compensation is California law, and specifically it says if you have one or more employees, one or more, then you must have workers' compensation coverage. If you are a sole proprietor, you do not need to have workers' compensation. And if you're a sole proprietor, we will accept a simple statement on your letterhead, and my office will waive the workers' compensation insurance requirement if that is your situation. But if you have one or more employees, it's the law, and we can't change that. And so you would need to demonstrate that you have coverage. Automobile insurance is probably the one people are most familiar with, because whether you have a business or not, in California, it's the law that you have to carry a minimum amount of automobile liability insurance. Same thing when you're doing business with the city or become a grant recipient from the city. The difference here is when we say if applicable, it's fairly common for my office to hear, well, you know, we're performing a certain service, we're doing a certain thing under agreement with the city, but we do not use any vehicles to do it. We, by the nature of what we do, it's simply something that we're doing at home with computers over the web, or when we do have to go somewhere, we're taking public transportation. That's fine. If in fact, to perform what you're going to do under the terms of the grant, you're not going to use any vehicles, then we would be willing to waive that requirement. Same procedure as workers' comp. We need something on your letterhead with a short explanation. We don't want you to write a book for us, and then we would provide the waiver. The limits for automobile insurance, we ask for a lot. We ask for $1 million, which is not what people typically carry for their own automobile insurance. This is a business auto application, though. So if you are using vehicles to perform the day-to-day or week-to-week tasks of your business, it's highly advisable that you have a business auto policy. What a lot of people have found out on a very bad day is they thought their personal auto policy would cover what they were doing as a business, and that's just an escape hatch for the insurance company to turn around and say, oh, you did not tell us you were using those vehicles for business purposes. We would have charged you more. We're going to deny your claim. So better be upfront about it with your broker or your agent. Get a price. Once again, we'd be willing to look at coverage that's more reasonable for what you could afford, but the law is that you do have to have a liability. Product liability, we're narrowing down here, probably won't apply to most of the entities interested in this program, as I understand it. Specifically, if you were a cultivator or a manufacturer of some kind of a device, then you would need product liability insurance, because even though you take your best effort and care, do everything as well as you can, down the road someone buys your product, whatever it is that you're selling, and it fails and they get hurt or they get sick. because something wasn't right about it. The law points back with pretty strict liability on those kinds of claims, back at who made the stuff or who grew it. And so you would need some kind of product liability coverage if that is what you're aiming to do. One little footnote here, the city does ask to be named as additional insured on liability coverage. That's important to us. What that means is if you get a grant and you have general liability at whatever amount you buy, and somebody comes to your place of business, trips and falls, or your office, they get hurt, they have expenses, your insurance company will take care of the claim. And if the city is named as additional insured, even though a lawyer might try to drag the city in, your insurance company would protect the city as well, which is only reasonable under that kind of circumstance. Moving ahead, permit applicants are not required to have insurance at the point of permit issuance. This has been a topic of discussion my office has had with the Office of Cannabis, and we're trying to move forward in a way that's as fair as it is to folks, not force anyone to incur expenses they don't need to until the time when it's most appropriate. So the agreement we have is that you can go through the process as Office of Cannabis lays out and describes for you, and my office is not going to jump in and say, show us you have proof of insurance while you're just an applicant. If you're successful in the process and the Office of Cannabis awards something to you, then we would want to see that insurance is in place prior to the money actually moving from the city to you, the grant awardee. I think I can pause there. Jeremy, is there anything else you wanted me to cover? Or Marissa? Okay, great.
No, thank you. Jeremy, you're muted.
There we go. Oh, thank you kindly, Peter, for that explanation. I'll note that there is a copy editing area error on item B. To have applicants need not have insurance until permit issuance. To Peter's point, once you become operational and engaging in commercial transactions, then these will kick in. Peter, I hope I'm not overstating or understating anything, but I could see how that line was a little confusing at the end there.
No, that's correct, but let me restate it so it's clear for folks. We would need to see evidence of insurance at the point at which you are actively using money, doing something as a business, as a consultant, whatever your activity is. Up till the point where you're active, we do not need to see it.
Thank you kindly. Moving ahead here, so the remainder of the slide deck provides some courtesy reminders to the group. We did discuss some of the eligibility earlier, and the eligibility was informed by public input and recommendations from the Cannabis Oversight Committee. We thank both committee members and the public for their ongoing engagement, bearing in mind that we continue to welcome feedback. This may not be the only grant opportunity. We certainly want to hear from the community about how this program could continue to build upon itself moving forward. Here we see the prioritization per group, group one being those that are 100% owners who also secured a formal referral to the planning department. So folks that are 100% owners but not yet referred to planning will receive the same amount of funds as this group 2A and 2B that we see here, those with at least 51% ownership or at least 40% ownership. Here we see the breakdown of funds up to $100,000 for those in group one. For everyone else, it is split evenly, a little over $48,000 for all other equity applicants to use for their startup and ongoing costs. Here we see the eligible expenses And to be reimbursed, your expenses must fall into one of these categories, whether it is capital improvements, fixtures and equipment, legal services, licensing, state application, fees, regulatory fees. So we think of something like pulling your building permit at the Department of Building Inspection, regulatory compliance, rent payments, and certainly the testing of cannabis. The OOC may conduct inspections to see that funds were used appropriately. This may include before and after pictures. We also highly encourage folks to keep a paper trail of their expenses. We will have to corroborate that what you plan to spend money on is actual concrete expense falling under one of these categories that we see here. As far as the reimbursement process, fast forwarding, you've registered as a bidder, you became a supplier, you'll sign your grants contract with the city, and the Office of Cannabis will provide that to city accounting. Accounting will create the purchase order. The equity applicant will submit their invoice to the OOC. That ties into the paper trail I just discussed. We'll either review, reject, or approve the invoice and convey that determination to accounting to remit payment. Some folks were wondering, well, how many invoices do I need to provide? So let's just use an analogy that if this was an eligible expense, you go to the grocery store, you buy 4 items. It is not as if you need an invoice for each separate item. That would be a high volume of invoices. What you can do is roll up your expenses into an invoice. We're hopeful that folks won't need more than 2 to 4 invoices total to capture all of their eligible expenses. Here we see how we'll perform the accounting. The equity applicant will receive a purchase order number. Again, you might have 2, 3, 4 invoices total. And to track it, you'll use your PO number, the purchase order number, -1, 2, 3, depending on how many invoices you'll need. That way we can tie the invoice to your purchase order to facilitate payment. So here we see a brief timeline where we started and where we're going. The application was launched earlier this month. We certainly encourage folks to look at the website, become a bidder, submit your application. This will really help to move things along for you and for this grant program as a whole. Again, I know there's been sensitivity whether inputting certain expenses will lock you in. That is not the case. They're merely estimates. We don't expect folks to know every expense to the penny at this point, but please do fill out that field to the best of your knowledge. Certainly fill out the demographic questionnaire if you're comfortable, and also send it to your owners as well. There is a function in the demographic questionnaire to allow you to enter in additional emails. Here we have our educational webinar today. I hope to post a recording of this, likely beginning of next week. Revisit these recordings as much as you need. Certainly understand that this is a lot of information to take in. I'm confident that we'll be able to navigate this process together. There is an application submission deadline, December 1. We do have a bit of time. It's about a month later. Bear in mind that Thanksgiving is at the end of November. There's another holiday in the middle, I believe Veterans Day. So this month will go by quick. I certainly hope that folks don't wait till the last minute so we can avoid any complications and troubleshoot any issues as needed. Then once folks become suppliers, people will be able to generally get reimbursed for expenses from August 2020 to March of 2021, at which point we'll get together with the public, the Cannabis Oversight Committee, before that time to think about what a proper redistribution model looks like. With that being said, Nikesh, if you wouldn't mind opening up the chat feature, happy to address questions, whether for me, maybe you have insurance questions for Peter. He knows those requirements in and out. So please feel free to submit your questions. We'll give a few minutes for folks to do so. In the meantime, I can address some of the common questions we've received so far. For example, people are wondering, let's say Jeremy is the equity applicant. I have multiple applications. Am I locked in for one application, or can I use expenses across my projects? The answer is yes. If you are an equity applicant that has met this eligibility criteria, you will need to identify one of your entities for the purpose of the supplier portal and to receive funds, but you will be able to use this opportunity for eligible expenses across your application so long as they're properly documented. Nikesh, any questions coming in so far?
Hi, Jeremy. So there is actually a request, and the request is to go back to the reimbursement process slide.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And apart from that request, I am not seeing any other questions in the chat box.
Okay. I understand. It's certainly middle end of the day here. Again, we can answer questions offline, email them to cannabisgrants@sfgov.org. I'll answer a few sort of the frequent questions that have come to me just to give folks an opportunity for the next few minutes. Another point that we received is whether an application must be completed at one sitting or whether folks can return to their application at a later time. The answer is due to some of our technological limitations. You will have to complete your application in one sitting. It shouldn't take longer than 20 minutes. If you need to come back, no problem, but you will have to complete it in one sitting. It will not save your work. An additional question we've received are folks eager to become suppliers. Certainly appreciate that eagerness. You'll likely need to await our sourcing event. Again, we want to hit a critical mass of eligible applicants to register as a bidder prior to inviting them to this event. Because of that, you may be limited in what you can accomplish between now and that point. But in the meantime, you can certainly gather your documents, connect with the social equity community if folks are having some trouble finding the right information on our website or wondering about next steps. You can always point them to the Office of Cannabis. We're more than happy to have a virtual meeting with folks one-on-one if they need that type of accommodation. And with that being said, Nikesh, it doesn't seem like there's any questions in our chat box.
There are no additional questions.
Right on. So thank you, community, for joining us this afternoon. We know this is a challenging time. We appreciate your continued partnership. Mr. Peter Goldstein, thank you for your input, your ongoing partnership for what is an exciting and first of its kind opportunity, giving cannabis grants to those that were hurt by the war on drugs. What a development as we enter into the 50th anniversary of the Controlled Substances Act. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Office of Cannabis City Partners.
Jeremy, before we sign off officially, there is one question, so
sure.
Let me run it by you. The question is, can more than one equity applicant per business apply?
Can more than one? So there is, unless I'm misunderstanding the question, there should be one equity applicant per business. Of course, folks can partner with each other, but what we're looking for is those that had the standing to apply for their commercial cannabis business permit. And they'll be able to facilitate this process. If they're partnered with someone, it will still have to go to that business that the equity applicant is a part of. Feel free to clarify your question or talk to me offline. But again, each applicant has one equity applicant with a standing to apply. Maybe they have investors, maybe those investors are also equity applicants, but it is for that particular person, equity applicant tied to that application.
And Jeremy, maybe just a clarifying piece to this question that might be helpful is if an equity applicant has multiple applications, then how would it work in terms of applying across those separate applications?
I see. Excellent. So the opportunity is per equity applicant, not the amount of applications an equity applicant has. Therefore, you'll either receive the up to $100,000 or up to about $48,000 and some change. From there, you can decide whether you want to split that money between projects, but it will come from your one entity that is a supplier. So I'm Jeremy. I have projects A, B, and C. I use project A to be a supplier, get my funds, but I can use those monies not just on project A, but B and C as well, so long as I document them and they fall within the requirements of the program.
And Jeremy, just for the edification of everyone who's tuning in, the amount that you could spend across businesses A, B, and C would be limited to the amount that has been designated to you as an equity applicant. If you're a sole proprietor, it's one amount. If you are a member of one of the other groups, it's a separate amount. Is that correct?
Correct. So it is one bucket of funds. If folks have multiple applications and differing ownership percentages, what we did was calculate the breakdown based on your highest level of ownership. If there was a situation that got you more money, we accounted for that. Even if you had different ownership, you were on a different part of the process across your applications. But that's how we calculated it. If I have an application at 100%, 51%, 40%, we did our calculations based on that 100% application. And unless there's anything else, I want to give an opportunity. Director Rodriguez would like to say a few words to bring us home. Director?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you so much for your presentation, all that you're doing to continue to stand this process up for our grants. This is the first of their kind. We appreciate and thank the state again for offering this opportunity to our community, especially now during this difficult time. I want to underscore the importance of applying early. I know the deadline says December, but remember, resources are limited, office staff hours are limited. We don't want everyone to try to apply on the last day or last week and miss this opportunity because we can't process everyone at the same time. So please take advantage of the runway that we've afforded everyone. Make sure that if you have questions, please do reach out. We're here for you to help answer some of this. I know it's not what seems to be a simple process. Unfortunately, nothing ever seems to be, but we are here as a resource to you to make sure that you're able to get through this process swiftly. And certainly don't take too much time because we want to make sure that all of you have this great opportunity. I know that there's a need in the community. Please let others know, let them know that these resources are available on our website. So you can watch this video, you can watch the other videos, you can call us. Please reach out. If you're having trouble, please reach out. We are here for you. And with that, thank you to the team, the Office of Cannabis, and also again to Peter. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing. The city resources are available to you and we will continue to be supportive. Thanks again. And thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
And Jeremy, with that, we will be closing the meeting now.
Perfect. Thanks, Nikesh.
Great job, Jeremy.
Thanks. I was, it felt a little